Hey sweethearts, it's Rowan, and, so this is the second video I'm filming today, and that's a little unusual for me, so I just thought I'd comment on that. So I got Nigel to get out of my actually, he jumped out on his own volition. I guess he had important cat shit to do. This is my third in a series of video book reports on the Wraeththu series by Storm Constantine, and I'm going to get into the little novels by other people who've written for the Wraeththu mythos series of stories, as well as Storm Zone, and the short stories. Like there's three by E.S. Wynn, I believe, and there's one by Wendy Darling and someone or other. I know that was co-authored. There's four, and then there's the fifth one. Let's see, The Win, Breeding Discontent, Tirza's Sons, Song of the Soul, and those other three are by various people. Okay, so there's 6 other novels. There's one, Rosamundi, which is considered by Storm Constantine and others at Emmanuel Press who've been working on the Wraeththu series with her. She's, last update I saw about this, Rosamundi is, pretty much shelved at this point. It was supposed to be out a year or so ago. I guess there are some people in the Wraeththu fan community who, consider it legendary. I'm like, I barely heard of it. Then again, I barely interact with any fandom of anything because, long story short, Tumblr people have really soured me on various fandoms. So yeah, there's 6 published novels by other authors, and then there's, Paragenesis, Paraeminence, Parakindred, Paraanomalia, and Paraspectral just came out, so 5 short story collections. Hello, Nigel Bat. And then this is the second of 3 trilogies by Storm Constantine, plus she's done 3 other books. I know one of them is a collection of shorter stories. One is the way the description reads on the back. It looks like 3 novellas. I'm just going to go through all of my Wraeththu books at some point, just a smaller video. I'm going to cut so much of this out. This is the second book in the Wraeththu Histories, and can we read this? This is the Shades of Time and Memory. This is book 2 in the Wraeththu Histories, which is the second trilogy of Storm Constantine's, second trilogy of novels. So I'm going to be reading a bit from this just because, I don't know. Because why not? I wrote it, right? Okay, so compared to the previous Wraeththu stories, this one does feel a little more disjointed, and so I do think this would be so she wrote an introduction to the Wraiths of Will and Pleasure, saying that she wanted to write it in a way that would be perfectly readable to somebody who hadn't read the first trilogy. And it is. I do think it is very readable and very enjoyable to people who had not read the first trilogy. This one, though, it's got a little bit more of a disjointed feel. Granted, part of this might be just how I read, which is largely on the bus. I've got, a good, 35 to 45 minute, each way on the bus, going to my mailbox and then coming back home. So that's about area of hour to an hour and a half of reading I can get done every day just on the bus, right? So there were a couple chapters where I wasn't completely sure whose storyline we were following, if I, like, picked back up in the middle of a chapter. Though, at the beginning of the chapter. So yeah, like, there were a couple chapters like that. So that is certainly a weakness of this book. Another weakness of this book is this very much feels like the second part of a series. So this definitely feels like the second part of a trilogy. Unlike the Wraiths of Will and Pleasure, where I can easily see somebody, like, that could be the only Wraeththu novel that they could read, and they would still find it thoroughly enjoyable. Like, you don't feel like you're missing anything at the end of that book, and you don't feel like you're missing out on something if you hadn't read the first trilogy. This one, though, it definitely feels like it's picking up where something left off, from, I want to say, midway through the first, maybe into the second chapter. So the first chapter, we are introduced, so yeah, it would be the second chapter where you realize that you are walking in on a story that has already begun. So, but yeah, the first chapter, we are introduced to Munhagwar, and Raven and Snake. And Snake, we later learn, was previously known as, and they use his preferred name throughout this, and Snake was previously known as, shit. Did I write it down here? I might have. But, so we do learn that Dorado, we learn that Snake was previously known as Dorado, who we learn from, now it does address this, in a way that if you didn't read the Wraiths of Will and Pleasure, you will learn that, Dorado was Pelaza's brother, but still, like, when we get to the second chapter where we follow, with Pel and Cal's story, it does feel like you've just, walked in on a story that has already begun. So, where the Wraiths of Will and Pleasure, that could easily stand alone. You get all of the information you need from the first trilogy, to be able to follow through it. And, and you don't feel like you'd be missing out on anything if you stopped reading there. Granted, it's good enough. I don't know why you'd want to stop reading there. But, you feel like, if you just enjoyed it but weren't, fully pulled into the world, you could easily stop, with, begin and end with the Wraiths of Will and Pleasure, and it could be very satisfying, The ending, I mean, yeah, it does kind of leave someone like me who got really pulled into the first trilogy, wanting for more, because it's like, okay, this world is becoming fully fleshed out now. But at the same time, it's got a good ending. It's got a good, satisfying ending if you were going to read it as a standalone book. This, though, it definitely feels like you're picking up where something left off. Speaking of trilogies, this is probably the first of the Wraeththu series where it really hit me. And I can't say exactly what about it really hit me, because there were hints all through the Wraiths of Will and Pleasure, especially, but also the fulfillments of Flesh and Desire, which would be the last in the first trilogy. So there was there were definitely hints all over the place. Please don't fall. There were definitely hints all over the place that a big piece of Storm's Wraeththu storytelling is, the rule of threes. Everything happens in threes. Threefold whatever and all that. So everything happens in threes. So yeah, like the Wraeththu's caste system, it's in threes. There's brain fart. So there's three levels of the caste system, and each level has its own 3 tiers. So, in the Wraiths of Will and Pleasure. Now, like, even though I know, she's writing. The last two has input from Taylor Elwood, who I kind of sort of know from the pagan blogosphere. But so I knew that that there's a series of a magical / pagan system and tradition based on the religion that appears in the Wraeththu novels. And so in reading so I knew that at the end result of the books was there were like 5 primary Wraeththu deities, but the ones in the Wraiths of Will and Pleasure that Flick discovers, though in his words creates, but then again, like I said, I'm coming from a very traditional polytheist mindset, which is that the gods just exist, and it's just tribes and of peoples who discover them. And if you want to say that, oh well, of course they existed, but as if ephemeral, whatever, that's another story for another time. So but yeah, like Flick first discovers 3 deities, but then a 4th is included when Galim and he are having a conversation when she's still very young. This is the Wraeththu Histories is the second of her 3 trilogies, though the third one is a bit more. The books in the third one are a bit more loosely connected, but they're kind of colloquially known in the amongst the Wraeththu fans as what the Albasul cycles. So, but again, it's 3 books, 3 levels of magic, 3 clear-cut trilogies, 1 additional book that she's written is the way the wording is. I just remembered I don't have that other book. But yeah, Blood Phoenix and a Rose and Alchemical Triptych. I don't have that one yet. That is on my my Amazon wish list. Please give me money if you want me to have it. But yeah, so yeah, this is the book where it just really just hit me like a ton of bricks, right? The number 3 is of utmost importance to Wraeththu mythology. Now, I can't say exactly what drove that point home to me, but it did nonetheless. That triunes and triads are a very strong feature in her Wraeththu works. I'm curious, if they're present in much of her other work. So where the story picks up. Now, I said in the first chapter we are introduced to new characters who we learn are, related in their own ways to Pelaz and the House of Aralis. And the story begins with the triad of House of Aralis being the 2 Tigran of Cal and Pelaz, and the Tigrina being Keoru, and they're the leaders of the Galaming. I think Storm prefers that pronounced like Gel, but I'm like, whatever. It reads more naturally to me as Galaming. And so their part of the story begins with the creation of a pearl, which is the first stage of Wraeththu gestation, with their 3 essences, which is something that has never been even attempted before, much less accomplished. Shortly thereafter, so before the pearl ends its first stage of gestation, before entering the second stage, actually there's only 2 stages of Harling gestation in the world of Wraeththu. There's the pearl, and it, forms within the body of the hostling, and then it is, released, and then after about 10 days or so, it's, it hatches, or more likely, a roughly toddler-sized infant, rips through the leather-like sack. I don't know. It's never... So, like, Wraeththu are monotremes, in addition to being hermaphroditic. In some ways we're going forward evolutionarily speaking, in other ways it's going back, because monotremes existed before, current mammals, and the only two monotreme left are platypus and echidnas. But I think there's a couple subspecies of echidna. Threes! So before the completion of the first stage of gestation of this pearl created with the essence of the triad, it is, stolen, literally ripped from Keiru's body, and, taken away into the, as best as anybody can tell, the other lanes. It's not especially clear in this book, but it does become much clearer in The Ghosts of Blood and Innocence. I'm not even a third of I'm just almost a third of the way through that one. That the other lanes are what exists between realms of reality. So it's definitely building off a multiverse definition of reality, and the other lanes exist between universes and, realities, and, so there's that. At approximately the same time, it's not clear, if it's the exact same moment or just later that day, Cal then disappears, and we don't hear from Cal for several chapters until, like, almost a third of the way to the ending. So we don't hear from Cal for almost 2/3 of a book after the pearl is stolen from Keiru's body, and he's told, you'll probably never be able to carry one again. We don't know if this means you'll be able to, impregnate another, one of the, with your own pearl, but, your cauldron of creation, which is, their uterus equivalent in their bodies. So, they're just like, this is just far too damaged that, like, the best of our healers, we don't know if we can even begin to, heal you in this manner. And so yeah, like, we don't hear from Cal for about a good 2/3 of the book after that. And when we do, he's being all, mystical and weird, and, he's learned a great many things from Theody, who we had not heard from since the end of the Wraeththu Chronicles trilogy, and, so the end of that. So he just kind of, like, it was assumed he had just ascended to, like, another plane of existence, into, a more, ethereal body, but, and in some ways he has. In some ways he has, but in other ways, he exists, like, in another, in another reality, not just another essence of being. So, now one thing that I really did enjoy about this is the whole family saga angle that, we are introduced to further members of Cal's family. And I do hope in The Ghost of Blood and Innocence we do come back to more of Mima. I do hope we see her again, because she was a character featured in the Wraeththu picture book, which, I might do a little bit of a review on that. I hope we do come back to Mima. I did enjoy her character. She's very tough as nails, very anti-nonsense. I did love her character, but I do love the way that we follow Snake's story in here, and, like, healing physically, mentally, spiritually. When we first meet him, he has become physically disabled, through the various wars that have been fought on the continent of Megalithica, which is basically a future vision of North America. So, he's become disabled. He's crippled in one leg, and I can say that because I am myself. So he's become crippled in one leg. He's he's totally blind in one eye, partially in another. If I remember correctly, it's implied he doesn't hear very well either anymore. And I do love the family saga aspect of this, and I do like how it continues on with the Ghost of Blood and Innocence. Again, this is very much the middle of a story. Like, you come in, you start reading this, and it's clear that you are lost if you haven't read the first book, at least in the Histories trilogy. On the other hand, the continuing story with Pelaz and Cal, that is based, that focuses more on the war with Ponclast, who is an exiled leader of the Var, which is a tribe that we met in the first trilogy. And the Vars are, they are considered about as warlike as the Uegana, who are one of the earliest tribes and considered, the most, barbaric, for lack of, better terms. So the Vars are considered, about as warlike and aggressive, to the point that, they completely ignore, any feminine aspect of their being. To a point. In here, Ponclast is willing to... It's not so much that he's willing to embrace the feminine aspect of his being, both, not just, spiritually and emotionally, but also physically. It's not so much that he's willing to embrace the feminine, it's that he's willing to sacrifice the masculine for what he considers the greater good of his side of this war. And while I'm not usually, one for, the fantasy war epics, and I did enjoy Lord of the Rings. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy it, but I enjoyed it more as a film series. Even then, the war battles were of far less interest to me than, the stories. And that's one thing that, in my attempts to read the Lord of the Rings books, Tolkien is really good at world building. He's really good at world building. So I don't, if you absolutely, I don't know, if you're one of those people who are just looking for more things to hate about Wraeththu, which, there's a lot of people who do, sense that horrible, really, really uncharitable review of the RPG. And as I haven't read much in the RPG yet, but I will say, as long as it's nowhere near as bad as Fatal or Rifts, the gameplay system can be made playable. Other than that, a lot of people have just been ripping on the Wraeththu setting, which, it's no, you're just going to be if you're going to rip on the setting, then, rather than, how the gameplay is designed, then what are you even, reviewing games for? Obviously, the setting is a matter of taste. The game design is something objective that you can review. Especially if you're going to rip apart the setting in your review without being familiar with the novels. But that's another story for another time. So, where was I going? So, one of the things that I really liked is that this is a war that takes place largely on the astral plane, implicitly in this reality. And we do see Lilim again very briefly, and she does play a very pivotal role in this war, in aid of in aid of the Gelming. But again, this is something that, you know, if you did not read the first book, it is not clear in this one who Lillian is, or what she is here to accomplish, or what her importance is to the story. So, so yeah, if you are hoping that this is, you know, a book that can easily stand on its own, like The Wraiths of Will and Pleasure was, you're going to be very disappointed. I mean, this is some top quality world building, but you really need to read, you cannot just pick up this one and, you know, and start reading it and be satisfied, you know. So you definitely, these are not standalone books. This is, you know, this makes it clear that this is definitely a part of a series, though, as I said, the first and the Wraeththu Histories could easily stand on its own. I do believe that. Because this one is more focused on a war between tribes, it does have a bit more angst to it, and some of the continued angst is all in this one. And a lot of people on Goodreads have, you know, given this, like, you know, 3 or 4 stars if they didn't, you know, outright give it, you know, 1 or 2. But, you know, like, the more charitable people who love it more, you know, who love the series more, you know, have even given this, you know, like, less than perfect reviews on Goodreads, in large part because the Cal and Pell story, this has, again, we come back to a lot of themes of fate. Like, Storm really loves writing in the theme of fate, and the idea that, you know, this is all happening for purpose. This is all for a greater purpose that we can only begin to comprehend at best. At the same time, you know, I understand how that can have its challenges in writing, and one of the things that I really loved about this is that, you know, even when you're in, you know, the quote-unquote perfect relationship, like, I've been in really good relationships, and I bring this up with Cal and Pell because they are separated for about 2/3 of the book. Because they are separated for about 2/3 of the book, Pell especially is experiencing all of this doubt, and Cal to a lesser degree. He's very standoffish. He's a much less interesting character to me than he was in his book in the Wraeththu Chronicles, Fulfillments of Flesh and Desire. So he's a far less interesting character to me in these stories, especially this one here, than he was in his own book. So yeah, like, to a lesser degree Cal, but Pell definitely is plagued with all of this doubt that, you know, Cal has completely lost interest to him, that the heart he was in love with, you know, is just no more. You know, this was a time that came and went, and they're both two completely different Hara now, and, you know, that's just the end of that. And it's and that arc in this, it does have a satisfying resolution, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily the happiest, you know? So it's not the happiest resolution, but it is a very satisfying one. And one thing that does also happen in this that that up to this point we thought was not at all possible in the world of Wraeththu was an accidental conception of a Harling. And we say accidental because, you know, everything in the world of Wraeththu is done with intent, and I say this not just, with Storm clearly doing, her, 3 trilogies even, plus, one book that it does sound like it's, an alchemical triptych. That's 3 novellas, in one volume. The one I've got, A Raven Bound with Lilies, I think that's shorter stories. Then there's another one that I've got, which is, it says, stories based on the seasons. So I think that's 4 stories. I haven't, properly looked through it. I'm just getting all the books, because after the first series, I'm like, nope, I want to finish them all. I want to go read them all. Gotta read them all. So everything within the world itself is done with intent. In fact, something that does come up in this one here is, and to a lesser degree in the Wraiths of Will and Pleasure, is the idea of intent. In fact, I think Oplexion does introduce this concept to Cal when she's initiating him both in Wraiths and in his book, Fulfillments, from the first series. So we know that there was intent behind the mutation that brought about the Wraeththu and the Camagrian species, which are divergent species of the human genome. In this world. So we know, at least as of this book, that there is intent behind that. And so, this has gone on in Wraeththu biology that, it is virtually unheard of up until, I want to say, the last chapter, maybe the second to last, in this, that accidental conception can happen when your when your defenses are down during the act of Aruna, which and there are certain forms of it. I do believe it was referred to as a ritual of Runa rather than a Grisicon, which I'm still trying to work out, how they differentiate the two, because I know in Wraiths, and this is Shades, in Wraiths, Grisicon is sex magic performed with healing properties. Let's see, in Ghosts, the Aruna that made the pearl of the essence of the 3 essences of the triad of Tigran, that was referred to as Grisicon. So in the but I do believe it was just referred to as Aruna in this one during this final battle on an astral plane with Ponclast. And that's what makes this... I know, this just sounds bizarre now, and it is, and it's beautiful. It's bizarre in a most beautiful way. So yeah, I do believe it was referred to as Aruna, or was it? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out where exactly their fine line between Aruna and Grisicon is. Pelkey, though, that's their third form of sex. Pelkey is basically rape. That's just their word for rape. And Pelkey is considered so abhorrent in practically all Wraeththu societies that some even don't even believe it actually happens. Much like, there are certain humans in human society who believe that rape doesn't actually happen. But that's another story for another time. So yeah, would I recommend this? Absolutely, absolutely. But I only recommend reading this if you've read The Wraiths of Will and Pleasure first, because, as I said, each trilogy, at least of these two, each of these trilogies, Chronicles and Histories, each of these trilogies can stand alone, but each book reads best as part of a trilogy. So, and ideally read in order. I suppose it's possible you could read Chronicles out of order. Some of it might make not so much sense. So Shades picks up where Wraiths left off, and Blood picks up where this one left off. So, yes, I would absolutely recommend it, especially if you enjoyed Race of Will and Pleasure. You don't have to read the Chronicles trilogy to enjoy the Histories trilogy. In fact, I'm enjoying the Histories trilogy more than I enjoyed the Chronicles trilogy, though I do think that having read the Chronicles trilogy first did give me an added level of enjoyment to the Histories trilogy. So, it looks like that's all I've got to say about this one. My next video book report, the video book report on Ghosts of Blood and Innocence, which is the third in the Wraeththu Histories, that, I don't know, let's see. I started reading that one about a week ago. I'm about a third of the way through. Let's say about 3 weeks. Let's say I'll be done with that one in about 3 weeks, maybe. Maybe 2 weeks. That would be nice. 3 weeks, definitely. So, the video for that should be within a week or so after I finish it. What was I doing there? And, I don't know. If I feel like it, I might do a picture book review, between these two. If I don't, oh well. I definitely do want to do a little review of that one. But will I do it in between these two? Only time will tell, right? Okay, well, I guess that's it for today. Gonna go edit this down. This is going on 50 minutes I've been rambling about books. I definitely need to cut at least a good 5 minutes out of this. So, you will see me at my next video, and I will see you when you make comments, and when some of you do your next videos, and I hope you all take care. So, bats and kisses, and goodbye.